We are live now. You can start.
Assalamu alaikum. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Welcome to the Global Association of Islamic Schools and the Spotlight on Islamic Organizations. It's really important to know what's out there to avail yourselves, your family, your schools. And so that's what we do here with the Global Association of Islamic Schools Spotlight on Organizations. I'm Professor Seema Imam, and today I'm going to host the presentation of the organization called Ruqaya's BookShelf. It is truly an honor to be with someone whose books I've known for some time. And during the presentation, if you have any questions, you can note them in the chat, and at the end we'll get to some of your questions. But I want to tell you that Asma Hussein, who's with us today, is the CEO and founder of Ruqaya's BookShelf. Today we will explore the world of Ruqaya's BookShelf with a director of awesomeness, and she will share her insights into how this all started and who this serves. She's been around with her books since 2015, and she's been publishing these bright, fun, engaging Islamic children's books when many years ago there were no books. So this is quite refreshing. It's a great opportunity to you as a viewer to learn about Ruqaya's BookShelf and Asma Hussein, who directs this beautiful organization, because you have so much now to add to your home and your school library. So I'm going to turn it over to Asma at this time, and let's see if you have questions, you note them, and we will begin now by saying welcome so much to this event today, Asma. Share your organization with us, please. Thank you.
Jazakumullah khairan, Seema. I really appreciate the intro. I'm really excited to be with you guys today, even though it's 8:30 a.m. where I am. but I got up bright and early so I could be with you today, alhamdulillah. Before I start, I just always start with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So my name is Asma Hussein, and as Seema said, I'm the founder of Ruqaya's BookShelf. We're a publishing company based in Canada, and today I want to share a little bit about our journey, and I want to share about why I'm so passionate about storytelling. And then I would like to show you all of our books, just go through them very quickly through our catalog. And I would love to hear from you guys. I would love for you guys to get in touch with me if you're interested in storytelling, if you're interested in manuscripts, if you're interested in any of the things I'm talking about. You can reach me by email, and that'll be up on the screen later as well, inshallah. So when I was growing up, I read voraciously. I was kind of an awkward child. I was shy. I sort of preferred the company of books over people, to be honest with you. So reading was my escape from the world. You know, we had a library that was just a 5-minute walk from where I lived, and I would go there with my siblings and take out stacks and stacks of books. And then I would hole myself up in my room for hours at a time, just reading. And my mom would basically have to pry books out of my hands in order for me to eat or sleep or do anything, you know, at a decent time. So I got lost in the world of my characters who had become like my friends. The problem, right, not that I recognized it back then at all, is that the stories I read were predominantly about white characters. You know, I shared very little in common with them. Their families didn't look like mine. They celebrated things I didn't believe in. They spoke and acted in ways that would have been considered unacceptable in my upbringing. And yet their stories were a part of me and a part of my identity growing up. You know, there is one exception, only one, a Muslim story that I remember very vividly, and it was called The Seven Surahs Surprise. And it was about a Muslim girl who really wanted to have a birthday party, but her parents didn't throw her one, and she was really disappointed. And then a few weeks later, she went to the store to buy something, and when she returned, there was a surprise party for her at her house because she memorized a set of 7 surahs from the Quran. So when I used to think about how to navigate my own daughter's birthdays years ago, my mind actually used to go back to this story. And it's a story that I read what feels like a lifetime ago. You know, I thought about how that girl's mother emphasized achievements as opposed to kind of entitlement based on a cultural idea that birthdays should be celebrated. You know, and this is not a rant against birthdays, you know, at all, because I know there's a diverse set of opinions. But my point is that I read this book over 25 years ago, and yet I vividly remember, as now a fully grown adult, the moral, the story's plot, the illustration style, even. And if something I read all those years ago has such a strong impact on me, it tells me that books read at an early age not only influence young readers, but they directly affect a child's view of himself, him or herself, their surroundings, their culture, their beliefs. So, I know that I'm talking to many educators, and I know that you guys know a lot of the research that's been done about this. But I will mention something. So there are research studies about benefits of exposure to books at an early age, development of language, critical thinking skills, cognitive skills. It's often they'll say it's a predictor of academic success. But what kind of books will truly enrich a child's understanding of him or herself and their surroundings? Now, I understand that kids want to be entertained just as we do, right? And we do entertain kids through our writing, but writing books that pander to the part of a kid's brain that just wants entertainment without any significant content, it's not the way to truly support your child's learning. So there is actually a huge push and in the mainstream children's publishing industry, and that's been going on for, I would say, at least a decade, to publish books that stay away from having morals, right? So that's one of the reasons I started writing children's books, right? Actually, before I started, I read a book called Writing Children's Books for Dummies. Okay, it's one of those black and yellow books, or publishing children's books for dummies, something like that. And there was a whole section in that book about how publishers are not interested in stories with morals anymore. So don't bother. As a writer, don't bother writing stories with morals, right? And that's one of the reasons I started writing these books that I wrote, and publishing them, because I wanted my own daughter to have books that weren't just silly or just funny or interesting, but I wanted them to be silly, funny, interesting, and have good content at the same time, right? So all of this built up inside of me, and it led me to start this publishing company, Ruqaya's BookShelf, in 2015. And I am so excited that we've been in business for that long and we haven't failed. Alhamdulillah. All of our books feature Muslim characters, Muslim protagonists, because I believe that representing Muslims matters for so many reasons that I'm going to outline in this session, inshallah. So why Ruqaya's BookShelf? Now, anyone in the publishing industry, especially smaller independent publishing companies, is going to tell you that this is not the field you go into if your goal is to make a ton of money. Okay, they say if you want to make a little bit of money, start with a lot of money, go into publishing, and then just lose it over time. Okay, so that's why you'll find a lot of people who are very motivated to publish or even self-publish books who actually give up after one title or two or three or five, because they see how all-consuming the field is with actually little monetary reward at the end. But I've stuck it out in this field for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, I love writing. I love providing a platform for other Muslim writers to publish, to learn, to flourish. And I genuinely believe in the importance and impact of this space. So it's twofold, right? Developing the books for kids and also developing and supporting Muslim writers through courses and coaching in order for them to continue writing and publishing their own content, whether it's through Ruqaya's BookShelf or elsewhere. So last year, we actually ran an amazing online course on the ins and outs of writing a picture book. And I hope that we get a chance to run it again later this year. And again, if you guys are interested in anything like that, just let us know. So, and the second part is looking at the research that I'm going to cite soon. I realized the immense real world and long-term impact that this work has on kids and families. So what other people see as entertainment in the form of books, I actually see as an integral learning tool. So my generation in the West, obviously we grew up reading non-Muslim stories, period, right? All those thousands of books that I read from the library, almost none of them represented me. And by the way, any stories that did mention Muslims coming from that mainstream publishing industry were more often than not deeply rooted in Orientalist beliefs and perspectives. So for example, and I know all of you guys are familiar with these examples, if a Muslim woman, especially a hijabi, was part of a story that I read as a teen, right? Even stories I read now, to be honest with you, her story would always be told from the perspective of her wanting to be liberated from her oppressive family, or fighting to love a boy who wasn't a Muslim, or rebelling against her backwards parents, etc., etc., etc. You know, and while we've made some headway in this journey with a lot more Muslim writers, we're still nowhere near actually having proper representation in the mainstream, like absolutely nowhere near it, right? So you're still going to see that constructive narrative of a hijabi on some Netflix show, falling in love with John, Jeremy Scott, whatever, and then struggling with her identity, taking her hijab off, being portrayed as having achieved some high level of freedom, or Muslim men being represented as either corrupt or too religious or a fanatic, right? Now, those constructs, as far as we've come, still very much exist in mainstream stories, movies, shows, books, you name it, right? So, and this is still the perspective that's sought by publishers and producers because it's a familiar trope. It's what makes sense to them. And I personally know many authors who are published in the mainstream who've had an incredibly hard time telling their stories authentically. They have to fight tooth and nail to not have those stories watered down. And that's exactly why I started Ruqaya's Bookshelf. I'm not interested in watering down our stories. We're going to talk about Allah. We're going to write, inshallah, and alhamdulillah. We're going to embrace and celebrate our cultures, our faith, our holidays, without pandering to the non Muslim or white gaze, and without veering into the familiar stereotypical tropes about Muslims. Because telling a story of Muslims who actually love and celebrate their identities really doesn't serve mainstream publishers, right? There's nothing interesting about it. There's nothing titillating about it. There's nothing sensationalist about it. And so they have no vested interest in telling our stories. Now, growing up, we really grappled with our Muslim identities, right? So consuming content full of characters that looked nothing like me meant that I had to work extra hard to just be okay with who I was and what I believed. I was always going against the grain. And it can be tiring, especially for kids and tweens and teens who are still very much in their formative years. So my generation, I would say, was more concerned about validating our identities and simply having to do things like find prayer spaces, having to navigate how to be visible Muslim in spaces that were very Islamophobic, very racist, and not even necessarily having the words to explain why we were uncomfortable in those spaces. Maybe that's giving away my age a little bit, but it's for a good cause. So, fighting for even reasonable accommodations as believers was our primary goal. So now we are hopefully, inshallah, moving into a new generation, a new phase where we hope that those struggles are not as pronounced and that our kids can think and develop and function on a higher plane because their identities are already solidified. And diversity in children's literature contributes astronomically to a child's identity, to their character education. And obviously, not to mention that seeing a kid in a book who looks like you and believes what you do, has a name like yours, is so cool and validating. Every time that I go into a school and I do a reading, and let's say I'm reading a book called Zaid and the Gigantic Cloud, a little kid will jump up and down and say, "My name is Zaid, my name is Zaid," and just the gleam in their eyes is just, it's so beautiful, and it automatically enriches their experience with that story. So storytelling is not a new phenomenon, right? It's always been used as a means of communication and imparting lessons, because storytelling actually creates an immersive learning experience that transcends just feeding your child information, right? Immersive experiences allow information and lessons to actually be embedded as opposed to just forgotten, right? I'm going to expand on it in a moment. The other important point that's actually really interesting is that stories impart information and lessons without imparting judgment. So if you're telling your child a story about honesty or integrity or trust in God, that story is happening outside of the child's reality. It's happening to a third-party character. So instead of kids feeling judged when their parents call them out for being dishonest, they're now learning about it with the context of judgment completely removed. And this, of course, is going to make the lesson so much easier to swallow, right? Interestingly, this is one technique that was actually used by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to teach. So instead of addressing a person who made a mistake directly, he would make a general statement to the community, right? So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam once said, "What is the matter? What is the matter with some people who raise their gaze to the heaven while they're praying?" You know, and he spoke out strongly against it, and he said, "Let them stop, or their eyesight will be taken away." And of course, he had seen the individuals who were doing this action. but he chose to advise the community in general and in an indirect way instead of speaking directly to those people who erred, right? And using this kind of approach has many benefits, right? You can turn it into a teachable moment, teach your whole family about a certain issue without necessarily casting blame on anyone. And then, in addition, by not identifying who the individuals at fault are, you prevent negative reactions from other people. It also conceals an embarrassing mistake, right? And avoids putting someone who made a mistake into a defensive position. So, of course, I just also want to say that in many instances, the Prophet ﷺ also corrected people's errors directly and advised them privately so as not to expose their mistakes. It all depended on the situation. But I would say there is something to be said about this kind of teaching. You know, when you adopt a more under the radar method of imparting knowledge, it makes it easier for kids to accept and internalize lessons or advice. And a lot of people that I talk to, it's very interesting. This is a very interesting point. When I go to an event and I have a table with all of our books, and the parents come and they visit our booth, they're still always asking for stories of the prophets only. They're not interested in fiction. They're not interested in anything else, right? And a lot of people still think that stories and storytellings are just for fun and don't really have an impact on learning or behavior. And that's a complete fallacy, right? Research has shown this over and over again. The language that kids hear, the way they are addressed, the stories that they're told, all become threads woven together that form their experiences and their identities, right? Even if I focus just on anecdotal evidence, right, I can see very clearly that kids retain information in stories and bring that information into the real world. It can be silly things, it can be important things, both of which are wonderful. You know, I'll give you some examples of things I've heard over the years during my own storytelling sessions or via parents. So, for example, actually one of the first books I wrote, Bismillah Soup, right? There are kids who used to hate eating soup, but right when they started reading that book, all they wanted to eat was soup, and they told their parents, "No, no, we want to eat Bismillah soup." And it is a bit of a silly example, but it's really interesting. You know, I've also seen kids read and reread books until the pages are falling out. I've seen kids sleep with books in their beds instead of stuffed animals. I've seen little girls try to find hijabs in the same color and pattern as characters in our stories so they can look more like them, or dress up as a character in a book for a character day at school. So actually, you can see a few posts if you visit my Instagram page of kids who are dressed up as different characters in our books. It's so cute. You know, I've seen kids doubled over in laughter, you know, at some of the silly things in our stories. I've seen them like ask me why the characters might be doing the right or wrong thing. And it really enhances their comprehension skills. They ask me, what happens next, right? Even as the story has already ended. So, and for example, I've seen them work hard to keep their promises. And then they say, because such and such character kept his promise, and I want to do that too. You know, and it's fascinating to watch kids' eyes light up and their pupils dilate. You know, they're hearing their names in stories. They're seeing families that look like theirs. And we can see it when we sit with our kids and read them a story, right? But the research also supports this, and it allows us to understand why. So studies show that on functional MRI scans, a lot of different areas of the brain light up when someone's listening to a story, right? Not only the networks involved in language processing, but other neural circuits as well. So one study of listeners found that the brain networks that process emotions arising from sounds were activated, especially during emotional parts of a story, right? So, and the next part is going to be a specific interest to, I think, parents and educators especially. So as you hear a story unfolding, being told, your brain waves, I found this so interesting. Your brain waves actually start to synchronize with those of the storyteller, right? So this research team recorded the brain activity in two people as one person told a story and the other listened. And they found that the greater the listener's comprehension, the more closely the brain wave patterns mirrored those of the storyteller. So telling stories to your kids is an immense form of bonding and connection, not just on an emotional level, but also a biological level. So that story time between you and your child creates a very, very deep connection. And as an aside, that's why as Muslims and as parents, educators, we have to be extra careful determining what kind of content we consume. and who it's coming from, right? It literally has the potential to embed itself in us on a biological level, right? People say that you are what you eat, but really it's much bigger than that. It's you are what you consume. So whatever you consume becomes a part of you. Okay, back to stories. So really effective stories obviously cause us to feel emotions, right? And emotions heighten our ability to memorize experiences, and it's easier actually for our brains to retrieve that data later on. And obviously, all the more reason to share important stories with our kids. Because emotions are a signal to the brain that whatever we're experiencing right now in the moment is important. So the brain actually pays more attention and stores the information in a deeper part of our minds. So we're actually wired, our brains are wired to love stories. If you've noticed, and obviously you have, even advertisers now rely on very intricate storytelling to sell a product or market their service, right? Because they know we're going to keep watching the ad or we're going to buy that product when it's wrapped up in a story that we connect with. So if brands and marketing companies are using the power of storytelling to sell to us, to get to us, we also have the ability to use storytelling to impart those messages that we want to get across to our kids and to others as well. You know, and if we backtrack, I also want to talk about the fact that reading and expanding our knowledge base and storytelling are not foreign concepts in our faith in Islam. Read, or Iqra, was the first word ever revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, now think back to the research about how when our emotions are heightened during a story, we recall concepts more easily. We connect deeply to the storyteller, right? So reading and storytelling are not just intellectual exercises, right? It's about expanding your mind to a point where you start to recognize and appreciate all the signs that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed on this earth. We are taught so many concepts in the Quran through storytelling, stories of messengers and righteous people, stories of their trials, stories of their triumphs, stories of destroyed nations. And we're taught the embodiments of this faith through the stories of our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so Allah's created us as social beings, always searching for someone with whom to connect over a shared experience, right? So, for example, if we look at the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there's no test that we go through except that he went through the same or worse. And so, studying the stories in his seerah, I see the humanity of his life, and I gravitate towards his example because of that deep rooted connection I feel to his story. And all of us were taught his seerah through stories, in the form of stories. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obviously, he uses storytelling in the Quran to teach us lessons as well. He doesn't just say to us, be patient, be steadfast, be modest, pray, sacrifice. He actually shows us these concepts in emotional stories so that our hearts can be moved and connected to those commandments. And I think that's really beautiful. It shows us just how deeply Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala really understands us and our inclination to learn through stories. So to summarize, I want to talk about why stories, and in particular Muslim stories, are important to us now as parents and educators. So number one, to anchor within our kids their Muslim identities. Okay, when we see people who share similar identifiers and features acting in a certain way, we're more likely to be open to taking on those same actions. There's a research study about that too, but I don't want to bog you down with too much research. Okay. So when you find books with characters that look like your kids and that are promoting concepts like honesty, kindness, faithfulness, gratitude, anti-bullying, all of those things are more likely to be internalized by your kids because they recognize that those characters are just like them, right? And the second point, why are Muslim books important now? To normalize and celebrate our beliefs, our families, our cultures. Now, we all know that we, in this dunya, we are strangers. Many of our beliefs are considered strange to kind of a mainstream Western population. And while there is merit in knowing that we stand out and will always be considered different, children also need to be able to celebrate and embrace their beliefs, and they need to be provided safe spaces to do so, right? So reading about characters who love their faith, who practice their faith, shows them that it's okay for them to do that as well. Okay. Now, the third point, the third and last point actually, um, reading and telling stories serves as bonding time between parent and child, or even between educator and child. And this is arguably one of the most important aspects of this entire presentation, right? Excuse me. I remember listening to an Islamic lecture about this several years ago. And the scholar had said something very interesting. He said that 90% of tarbiyah, raising your child, is your connection, your love, and the strength of your relationship with your child. And only 10% is actually information that you pass on to your children, right? So foster that 90%. Foster the love and the connection and the friendship, because it's through that bonding that and that relationship that you actually open the door and open their little hearts to listen to what you're actually teaching them. And of course, at the end, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us and our children. All we're responsible for is tying our camel, putting our best effort forward, and then putting our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's the greatest protector and the greatest guide. So I would like to show you guys, before we move on to Q&A, the catalog that we have right now with all of our books. Now, before I get into that, I just want to quickly say that some of the stories we have coming up, inshallah, this year and next year are around the themes of, there's one story about Laylatul Qadr actually coming out really soon, maybe in a month or a month and a half, inshallah. We have a story all about praying Salat al-Fajr in the masjid. We have a story about a young Muslim boy grappling with the fact that his grandfather isn't a Muslim. We have a book coming up where the character has Alzheimer's, which is basically never talked about in the Muslim community. We have a book coming up about sacrificing what you want in order to help somebody close to you. And then another book, and we have many. So I don't want to bore you guys with this, but the concept of all living things making dhikr to Allah. Now, these are concepts that are very diverse. They vary wildly, right? But to be honest, so many of these, or almost all of them, to be honest with you, just wouldn't fly in the mainstream publishing industry. They just would not, they wouldn't have space there, you know? So that's essentially why we do the work that we do, right? Because there is no other space to do it that is going to actually be welcoming to us. And we are the experts of our own stories. If someone comes in and tries to tell our stories, they're not going to get it right. We are the experts of our own stories, and that's why we are in a position to tell those stories. Okay, so Brother Idris, if you could just pull up the PDF on the screen so I can show all these awesome people. Okay, here it is. Bismillah. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go through this document with you, go through some of our stories, and if you guys have any questions, if we have time to address them in this session, I'd love to hear them. If we don't, please reach out to me. My email address is right here on the screen, info@ruqayasbookshelf.com. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us anywhere, basically. Reach out to me. I'll be happy to chat with you, inshallah. So, in no particular order, right? Because these books have been published in different years. So we have The Great Hair Exchange, which is really all about twins who learn to love how Allah created them individually and uniquely. Yasmin's Belly Button, which is about the connection of a child and a baby to his or her mother, right? That's a beautiful story. And I know I'm biased because I wrote that story. That's actually Bismillah Soup and Yasmin's Belly Button are actually the two very first books I ever wrote, children's books. We have Baby's Blessings, and all these now are by different authors. So again, Baby's Blessing, the theme is around being grateful even when things seem to not be going your way. Bilal's Second Surprise is about a little boy named Bilal who is who's going to have a new sibling in the family, and that's a very funny story. Rami the Ramadan Cat is all about integrity and honesty and making friends in a new city in the context of Ramadan. 100 Flavors of Ice Cream is actually about Jannah, very much about Jannah. Bismillah Soup is like obviously it was the first, so it was, it's our bestseller actually amongst all of our stories. And it's actually a spin on Stone Soup. I love Stone Soup. There's so many versions of Stone Soup that have been done, but never a Muslim version. And so the story is very dear to me. Mr. Gamal's gratitude glasses, a teacher who's trying to teach his students gratitude through a physical item, glasses. Adventures of Malik Amir, this is an activity book about some different hadith. Snatched is about honesty, telling the truth, fixing your mistakes, right? Based on the hadith that if you do a bad deed, do a good deed to erase it, right? So a lot of our stories, or several of our stories actually, I would say are based on like one concept in Islam, a hadith or a verse or something like that, and that's where the story kind of is born. Nusayba and the fifth grade bullies, so all about this girl Nusayba who stands up to bullies. Who Will Help Me Make Iftar is actually based on the Little Red Hen, right? It's a story that I read growing up, and I was always dissatisfied with the ending of the Little Red Hen, and so I rewrote it with obviously human characters, not animal characters, to have like a beautiful, satisfying ending where people actually come to the aid and help their neighbors. Secret Recipe Box is about a Palestinian grandmother who comes to live with her son and grandchildren, and kind of that connection between grandparent and grandchild. Basir the basketballer says, Inshallah. It's all about learning what Inshallah means, wrapped up in a really interesting story about a girl who wants to become the captain of her basketball team. Amir's Blue Jacket. This is a recent one. This was a difficult story to write, but or to publish actually. But it's about a boy whose grandfather has passed away, and he holds on to this jacket of his as a symbol kind of his connection. And I'm not going to spoil any of these stories for you, but they're really beautiful stories. My Garden Over Gaza is also a beautiful story published just last year, about the resilience of this girl who plants a garden on her rooftop building. There was an old auntie who swallowed a samosa, hilarious story based on there was an old woman who swallowed a fly, right? As you can tell, I love to write stories that kind of are inspired by other stories and folktales, but just put a Islamic or Muslim/Islamic twist on them. Not Too Little to Make a Difference is about a little girl who can't go to school because her mom did not make enough money to pay for her fees, and then what she does to battle that and actually get back to school. The Green Dinosaur Umbrella is a Hajj story, really beautiful concept book that shows the different steps of Hajj, and it's a very simple story, but very, very beautiful. It's currently sold out in North America, but not overseas. Heaven is at Mama's Feet is also based on the hadith that Jannah lies under the feet of your mother. And it's anyway, yes, I don't want to give it away. Pepperoni Pitches and Other Problems, about being in a new school, making new friends, and obviously pepperoni pizza that she can't eat. Spell It Like Summer is very much about persistence, about a child who comes to America as a refugee and enters a spelling bee, right? And she's very persistent with it. It's also a little bit about bullying. So Ahmed and the Very Stuck Teapot is about doing the right thing, even though it's not convenient, and care for animals. Zayda and the Gigantic Cloud is about big emotions and how to kind of counter that negative cloud that builds over your head when you go through difficult things. Alana's Bananas. This is a funny one. All she eats is bananas, and then when there's no more access to bananas, she has to figure out what she's going to do. Elephant's Makeover is a news story as well. It's by Ruqaya Khan, who's an amazing, literally like a New York Times bestselling author who worked with us on this story. It's actually also about bullying, but it's with animal characters. Now, Blackout and Stuck in the Middle are chapter books, as well as the next page, the Ali series. So these are both chapter books for a little bit of an older age group. And then the Ali series as well. It's a book. It's a set of 5 books. Just very adventurous. It's all based on one character, Ali, and all the shenanigans that he gets up to. So it's a very mischievous, entertaining set of stories. And then, of course, I have my own books, A Temporary Gift and A Place of Refuge, which are geared more towards adults. So those are our books so far, alhamdulillah. We have a couple new books. We have 2 new books coming out very soon, and then many other books that are in the queue to come out. So hopefully, inshallah, over the next 2 years or so, there will be an influx of new stories coming to Ruqaya's bookshelf. So with that, I would like to go to Q&A, but before I say that, maybe we can leave this up on the screen. You guys can visit the website at your convenience. I think my email is up here, my Instagram, my Facebook. Please contact me for um, if you guys want wholesale rates for your schools. We always have promotions specifically for libraries and schools at any time. So you guys can email me for that. If you guys want to do a book fair at your school, get in touch and we'll chat about it. There's a lot of opportunities to work together, inshallah. And I would be so stoked and happy to hear from you.
Oh, thank you so much. This is wonderful. I wonder if you want the first page up so everyone
Oh
would
yeah,
know
we can definitely
that
go
our
back.
presentation today, we are blessed to be listening to the founder and author of the organization and publisher Ruqaya's BookShelf. So any of you joined us, that's who we're talking with, is the founder, Asma Hussein. Now she's talking about having 8 years into this professional work, this exciting work. And it's really just phenomenal how she told us about the MRI scan and the reader and the listener, and these things that the brain does. It's the foundation for life, right? You gave us
Absolutely.
a lot of reasons to read. 90% tarbiyah, right? I went back into my childhood while I was listening to you and remembered that my book, like yours, was the little engine that taught me perseverance. And you really touched on so many things. It was so exciting to listen to you. I do want to have questions. I can't see any on the screen, so maybe I'm not looking in the right place. But I'd be happy to find those questions or let Brother Idris ask them if I'm not looking in the right place. I will keep talking for a minute until I see any question from the audience. But when you mentioned the beautiful hijab that students would go out and look for, that matching hijab, that is so true. I mean, students sleep with books; they absolutely do. And so I have a couple questions for you. When we look at a picture book, and I'm an educator, professor, and when we look at books, we look at the pictures. And if the pictures, like that picture of hijab, that print, that color, was so important to that child, where's your illustrator? You have a department of illustration. What are you doing with your illustrations? Tell us about
I love that question because I don't have a department of anything.
it.
The
Okay.
department of everything is just me. So
Oh,
no, no,
mashallah.
like
You're talented.
no. So I don't do the illustration, but I'm the
Right.
bottleneck for all the work comes through
Mm,
me. But
mm,
so this is, I feel, one of the most fun parts of the work, actually,
mm.
to have a story and get an understanding of what the atmosphere of that story is, what the vibe of that story is, and then trying to find an illustrator whose style matches it. Because the
Mm.
illustration style in our stories can vary, you know,
Sure.
can vary very much. Okay. So
Okay.
we'll have stories that have like really silly illustrations and stories that will have more colorful illustrations, less color, and it all kind of depends on the content of the story, right? And there's a certain je ne sais quoi about hitting that mark and getting the right illustrator for the story.
Mm.
So I hire freelance illustrators. I spend many hours going through portfolios of illustrators from around the world until I find one that is the right fit for a story. But in once I do have a really good experience with an illustrator, yep, we do keep them in that department, in that we
I
keep them
see.
on file and say, you know what, we're going to work with this illustrator again and again. So alhamdulillah, we do have a couple of illustrators that we've worked with more than once. And I hope that we actually build that, I guess, library of illustrators in that department. I'm going to, you know what, from now on, I'm going to call it the Department of Illustrators.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, that's an awesome answer, and I do believe you when you say it takes hours going through portfolios, to find the right person that can actually make that story come alive. Which makes me think, you mentioned, you have a place to post or look for anyone who wants to send a manuscript. But I'll just add a plug here for send your portfolio to Asma Hussein from Ruqaya's bookshelf because you might become an illustrator for one of these stories that sticks in the minds and leads the life in a child's upbringing and growing that will be forever remembered. So I wonder what advice, you talked about your youth. Um, the Global Association of Islamic Schools, hosting this event today, has, schools all over the world that have come together to talk to one another. And books have been a very important aspect of the Global Association with a committee and with many authors discussing and talking together. So I wonder what advice, since you were trying to be a reader and hiding with your books and becoming a writer, we need your advice to children about writing and to parents who may be thinking, the arts are not where I want my child to excel. I want something else. But look at you, mashallah, you've excelled in the arts and creative writing, mashallah. And you've touched many lives. So how would you advise children and parents, young people and parents?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. That's a wonderful question. So in terms of how to actually develop those skills, first and foremost, a child has to read, and it's something that I've really pushed on my own daughter, and she's always loved books. And I'm struggling a little bit right now.
Mm,
She's getting into like the tween age, and
mhm,
so she wants to read more graphic novels instead of actual, proper chapter books and things for middle grade children.
mhm,
Um, but I keep kind of pushing that skill because this part of a child's life is never going to come back, right? When they're at that age where they're absorbing so much vocabulary, so much information, right? Which obviously, on based on my whole presentation, of course, we have to be careful about what kinds of books we bring into our homes, right? And what
sure.
kinds of content, movies, shows, all of that stuff. But at the same time, we need to also really put in our resources, right, to support them having these books, right? I know that a lot of parents, maybe not, in I don't want to talk about generations, right? Because that might be a stereotype, but there are parents who don't necessarily want to spend the money on books, that don't
Mhm,
necessarily want to um, develop that part of a child's brain because they want them to go into something more technical. And the thing is, whether your child goes into something more technical, goes into medical school, becomes a lawyer, whatever it is, or kind of goes more into the arts, the skill of reading and communication is going to be applicable to 1,000 different situations, right?
yeah.
So there is no there should not be any limit on helping your child develop those skills, right? So you always start with reading, and then the writing piece is always a tricky piece too, because I find that kids now have a very short attention span when it comes to
Mhm,
writing. I have a hard time getting my child to write things out. I know that some parents, they get their kids to write journals and stuff like that. Um, but you can find little ways to actually work with your child on kind of that creative piece, so writing and then the creative writing. And I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, we used to have this thing that we do at school where I would write a sentence of a story,
mhm,
right, and then maybe two words on the second line, and then I would fold the paper and then pass it to my friend. So all
mm,
she are those two words, and then she now adds something to the story, right? And then we keep folding the paper and then passing it around to different friends. And then when
mm,
we unfold the paper and we read the story, it's such a weird, silly story, and it's really fun, it's really entertaining. And so doing things like that,
sure.
that don't feel like work, right? That feel more like just fun is a great way to do it. There's also books on. I don't want to take too much time with this answer, but um, if you get your kids books, and I'm sure you can find free printables online too of this, but like with writing prompts. So it takes the guesswork out of it as a parent or as an educator, right? You
Sure.
have writing prompts for a child, like, okay, imagine this scenario, what would happen? Like some weird, silly, funny scenario, and then they come and they start
Mm,
writing out like a scenario. It's easier, right, to actually
mhm,
prompt them with a little nugget of something. So
mhm,
I think just going through life with the knowledge that the reading and writing are so important, right? And then also, if your child does want to go in that direction, that you give life to that. You give importance to that feeling that they have, the passion that they have. And that doesn't mean, just because you go into the arts, it doesn't mean you're going to be a starving artist, right?
The starving artist.
Yeah, inshallah, inshallah. And
Hmm.
honestly, so much of this work, this creative work of creating content,
Yes.
is actually some of the most important work in developing just our general culture as a Muslim community in the West, and I'm sure elsewhere as well. And so that work really should not and cannot be diminished, right? It's just as important as becoming a doctor. It's just as important as becoming a lawyer or whatever other field, right? This field is also incredibly, incredibly important.
Yeah, I really like that you're saying that. As a teacher, I've always said, well, yeah, I teach reading. Maybe
Mm.
that sounds boring. I don't do it anymore. I teach teachers. But but it's amazing that reading then is used in every subject for whomever, whatever you go into.
Mm.
So if you become a solid, strong character, and you talked a lot about that, loving and celebrating your identity, that's going to matter in whatever field you go into. But I have some
Yes.
more questions. I don't see questions from the audience yet, but I wanted to ask a couple of things. Um, I'm into reading on the Kindle app on my iPad, and also love my Audible books. Um, so that's a question for you if you haven't done that yet. And also tell us about grade level. You pointed out in your beautiful catalog some chapter books. So
Yes.
in the chapter books, like the one, I think there were five in the series. I think the character was Ali. What's the
Yes.
grade level? Who would we buy that for? That set of five books.
So that set of five books is for kids between the ages, I would say, of 7 to 11. Now, technically, we have it as 8 plus, but if your child is a little bit of an advanced reader, they could probably kind of swing it at 7. They're not very thick books, and they have black and white illustrations, and they're very fun. And so, even I would say at the age of 7 up until 10, 11, that's a great age
Mm, mm,
for that. And similar also for the two other chapter books we have, Stuck in the Middle and Blackout. I would say those are also geared towards that same age. So once you're kind of past the
mm,
wanting to look at picture books, when kids kind of are like, that's too babyish, right at that point, these books kind of come in.
Okay, well, that's perfect. That's about the time they want the chapter book anyway, and they
Yeah.
begin to feel so grown up in their reading. What about the Kindle and the audio? Is that on your list of things to do?
Perhaps one day, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. We struggle with the e versions of things because it's very easy for copyright issues to come about, and so
Mm,
we need to actually, like, I would need to actually hire someone to do this very
mm,
diligently and put them up on the platforms in a way that people wouldn't be able to kind of pirate the books and stuff. Because we face a lot of issues with this with one of the other books that did have an ebook version. So I've been turned off of that for a bit, but I do know
I see. Yeah.
a lot of kids do access this content through apps, through YouTube story times and stuff like that. So inshallah, at one point, I hope soon we will start venturing into that.
Wonderful. So I sort of saved this last 7 or 8 minutes and took us to grade level, what the grade level of the book is, because I wanted you to focus on advice for teachers, classroom use. You mentioned having a book fair, and I think that's important to get the books into the classroom,
Yes.
and then how to get them used. There's some very famous stories. I suspect one day you'll be another Dr. Seuss. Um, what do you say to teachers incorporating your books into their classrooms worldwide now?
Oh, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. It's actually very easy to incorporate our books into different lessons that you want to impart to your kids. So we actually have a number of activities for different books. So teachers can always get in touch with me. I don't think that it's up on our website at the moment, but teachers can get in touch with me, and I actually have activity packs for various books, so they can
Mm,
purchase the books, and then they it takes the guesswork out of it for them, right? I'm like,
sure.
here's a book,
Yeah.
here's the activity for your kids. But then, story times are always great for reading comprehension, regardless of what the story is. If you're sitting in a circle and you're telling the story,
Mm,
so reading comprehension, artwork, drawing, coloring, like, um, journaling, writing, summarizing what the book was about, asking probing questions, like if you were this character, what would you have done? All of those things that educators already are way more well versed in than I am. They can use these books in that context. And then with the book fairs, I find that they usually go really well, alhamdulillah. So we've sold our books at wholesale rates to schools, and then the schools are welcome to mark up the price and keep whatever profit it is for the school. Have the parents come in and look at the books
mm,
and actually flip through them, buy books for their children, or donate books to their school libraries or school classrooms or whatnot.
mm.
So we've run different programs like that before, and alhamdulillah, it usually it goes well. I know that a lot of people are really into scholastic book fairs. My
Oh,
daughter's is as well,
yeah.
and they're great. Like I'm not complaining about that, but especially if you are an Islamic school, you need to have Muslim, books written by Muslim
Yes.
authors and books that impart those lessons and those morals
Yes.
as part of that book fair. I think that's really, really
Absolutely.
important. And I think parents are willing to actually, come in and buy those books for their kids because they're really starting to see the value of them.
Hmm. That's really important. So having them as a part of the curriculum, having some lesson plans for teachers or ways to connect to third grade curriculum, fourth grade curriculum. I'm sure teachers would really appreciate all of that, and just getting to see your catalog is quite impressive, and the idea that you started with, the Muslim identity, and then the identity that they will acquire as a result of the Scholastic Book Fair. Diary of a Wimpy Kid always comes to mind because it's not hilarious humor.
Yes.
It's over the on the other side. So I'd
Those are the
much
kinds
rather.
of books that my
Yes,
daughter always gravitates towards in
yes,
the
yes,
Scholastic Book Fair, and they're written in a way that
yes.
actually really attracts kids. So you can't blame the
Of
kids for
course. Yeah,
gravitating towards them, right?
but Asma, you've done some good research. And what you told us in the beginning is the reason why we want the community worldwide to support your project, to support your efforts, and to really think about that. I know teachers, who are building their libraries, having a set of books, will be excited about that. I'm wondering now, because I know your website and your catalog, where else are the books available? Amazon?
They are not available on Amazon currently.
No?
They were
Okay.
a couple of years ago. We pulled our books off of Amazon for a couple of different reasons. Some of
Sure.
them ethical, some of them otherwise.
Okay.
So predominantly, you'll find them through the website. There are some bookstores worldwide that carry our books. We
Okay.
have Dar es Salaam is a big one in Australia. We have, I think, Beitul Hikmah in South Africa.
Hmm.
We have one in Malaysia. We have one in the UK. So we do have bookstores that carry our books. But if you can't find one in your country, you can always reach out to me. And
Sure.
otherwise, you can order directly through Ruqaya's Bookshelf. Shipping is free in North America and the UK and Europe if you reach like a certain threshold. Um,
Okay.
and elsewhere, you can always get in touch with me and we can set something up. I can do like a custom order for you or whatnot. So
Mhm.
I'm here to facilitate all of that. Inshallah.
Oh, great. So for the listeners, I want to make sure they take note of, and people will watch this after because it's recorded. It's going to be available. We're going to promote it. So people are going to want, to know your website. But I want to reiterate something you said because I think it's valuable. You mentioned a course for, I believe it was for writing, and that you hope to do it another time. And so people might want to, this idea they've been tossing around in their head that they have a story or a book inside of their brain that they need to get onto paper. Here's an opportunity because schools and children, Muslim families, need more than Ruqaya's Bookshelf has right now, and many other publishers as well. So we just want to encourage the writer in the audience to be in touch with you and maybe be a member in that next class. That's exciting. Are there some closing thoughts that you have? I know we're getting close to our end, and we have a hard stop at well, it's 8:30 my time, so I got up
Oh,
earlier.
I had a hard time getting it this morning, but
Yes,
we did it. This is what we sacrifice for the good of the
alhamdulillah,
community.
alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Honestly, parting thoughts are, any questions that you guys have, any ideas that you have, please reach out to me. Asima mentioned that we have manuscript submissions open on the website all the time. So if you go to the website and there's a little tab that'll say manuscript submissions, click that and see what our guidelines are. There's also a free ebook on the website about self-editing your picture book. So if you do have a picture book that's ready or an idea, follow us on social medias so that when that picture book course comes up again, inshallah, and we're hoping end of this year or beginning of next, that you can actually, be a part of that. I would love to also discuss if you guys have students who would like to be a part of that course. Maybe we could do like a package for schools to have kids kind of develop their writing as well. Probably kids that are a little bit older. So I just want to thank you so much for having me on this platform. I'm really excited to work with this association in the future, inshallah. And please, please, please keep me in your dua and keep Ruqaya's Bookshelf in your dua because it has been a little bit of an uphill battle over the last couple of years. But alhamdulillah, I'm really passionate about this work. And so I've kept pushing. Inshallah, hopefully we're getting past that hump, and things will be more smooth sailing, inshallah.
Wonderful, thank you. So, in closing, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ease your journey, to clear your path, to make it possible for you and those around you, and those authors and illustrators to be able to reach a greater, broader, more meaningful audience than you have today, and that you reach into the future and help us with this identity that we're facing. Allah, give us the strength and the wisdom to do the best for the ummah.
Ameen.
Thank you so much, Asma from Ruqaya's Bookshelf, for spending that time with us today. And
my absolute pleasure.
Really appreciate it. I know we wanted to have that hard stop because you have some place to be, and so we're grateful to the time you spent with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.